What's good? What's good, YouTube? It is your girl Trisha. Check it back in. It's been a couple of days. I've been wrestling with this message, and it was hard. It was hard because sometimes you still feel inadequate to do His work, despite of I'm here. And today, what I want to talk to you about is being broken, burdened, and rebuked in order for you to release your power, in order for you to find your purpose within you. Sometimes you got so many stripes against you that you don't even realize how you're going to fulfill your purpose. How are you going to make it there? How are you going to see the glory? But in the midst of that, what I often had to go back and understand during this time is the suffering, the redefinement, and the spiritual empowerment that all comes from your trials, your hardship, and that divine correction that you're going to need. That is necessary. It's necessary in this season, you guys. I'm sorry, I got my notes here too. But it's necessary in order for us to step into our God-given purpose. For a lot of us, we feel that suffering right now, right? You feel that weight getting up on you. You feel that pressure starting to get up on you in this season. Well, in this season, what is happening to you is the brokenness is bringing the discipline and that dependency that you need on God. That's what that brokenness is doing for us right now. And it's hard for us to understand that because it has so much agony attached to it, doesn't it? When you realize, what am I doing this for? Why am I right here in this position? I don't see past it. If you were with me in my last message, I told you to step out of, how do you step out of the physical? Well, that's in your spirit. And I'm going to tell you who the prime example of this is, while I was reading, is David. Because not only was David broken, burdened, and rebuked, God was able to use him for a purpose, wasn't he? But I ended up learning something else about David. Even though that man, the man always was still in his flesh, he let us know that time after time we're going to fall short of God's glory. We're going to fail. Each day you're alive, you have the potential to fail. Because none of us, I don't care who you are, is that glory that there are without sin. We all have some level of sin, whether we did it, seen it, thought it. We all have some level. So when we're honest with ourselves, we'll understand these things, right? But Psalms 34:18, it said, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and save the crushed in spirit. But David said something that was so profound. David said, taste and see that the Lord is good. So David understood that despite his ratchetness, he knew to give God his glory. He knew to go sit with the Lord. In fact, in Psalms 34:6, he said, this poor man cried, and the Lord pulled him out of all his troubles. See, David understood that no matter what he went through, he still had to go and sit with God, with Jesus. And he understood that when he was in that spiritual realm, he understood that his shame went away, that his burdens got lighter. Even when he was in the face of finna lose it all, he knew to call on the Lord for his restoration. In this season, when you're feeling broken, when you're feeling burdened, when you're feeling rebuked, it's really about you staying in that spiritual realm. How do you stay there? Why would you stay there? Well, as I've been studying, y'all, let me tell y'all, I learned while you're staying in that autonomy with God, in that spiritual aspect with Jesus. When you're searching these all out, right? One of the things I have learned is that You have to stay in that fear of the Lord. And I'm not meaning in a negative way at all. When I'm saying you have to stay in the fear of the Lord, that means you have to stay in that spiritual, that holy realm with him. Because it is so many things that's going to be pulling us, pulling our flesh, pulling it. I'm telling you, it's going to pull at your flesh on so many different levels. Meaning anything externally. Job, children, habits, schooling, mom, your dad. Anything that's close in there that can get close to your heart, it's going to pull on it. It's going to pull on it. But when you're standing into that fear of God, you understand that with that fear of God, it's going to hold you. It is going to hold you in those times. One of the things I understood was, he said, receiving, excuse me, let me back this up. He said, when you fear the Lord, you are just only at the beginning. Meaning when you just get into the spirit with him and you learn how to rest in that spirit, that is just the beginning of the knowledge that he has for you. He said that brokenness that led you right there to right here where you're at, he said that's just the beginning of the knowledge that he has for you. And when I had to look this up, as I was looking this up, it said that the knowledge is just you knowing him. It was just you knowing him. But it said once you know him, you start receiving the kingdom that can't be shaken. And I was like, what? He said, yeah, because you're going to walk in his comfort. You're going to walk in there. He's going to comfort you. And at some point, when he realized that he comforted you enough, he gives you his wisdom. And it's a different, when he's giving you knowledge, he's giving you just the knowing of who he is. But when he gives you his wisdom, what did I say it was? It was putting what you know into practice. Putting what you know into practice, meaning he gave you the knowing for something, whether it was business, whether it was your school, whether it was with your children. He put the knowledge in you. But when he gave you the wisdom, that's from you sitting with him. That's from him uttering on your behalf. He said when you get into there, he gives you his wisdom. He said, and then he wants to see that wisdom that he gave you, if you can put it into practice. Ooh, yeah. He said, then put it into practice. He said, and when you get to this point, baby, he called it a prerequisite. He called it a prerequisite. He said, you having the fear of the Lord in you, that was just a prerequisite. He said, baby, you ain't even tapped all the way in. Ooh, He said, we ain't even tapped all the way into him yet. I love it. I love it. Y'all, it is y'all girl, Trisha. Yes. We're leveling up. He said, push the mission. I am part of a nonprofit. It's called Let's Direct Our Own Path, where we're doing mentorships, where we're doing one-on-ones, where if you're looking for housing, any of that, hit your girl up. The description is in the drop box. And if you feel led, don't forget to also, you can always sow a seed in this season, okay? But let me get back. And he said, it is the prerequisite. And I was like, the prerequisite? I was like, why? And then he had said, well, when you're in school, he said, when you wanted to become a nurse, wasn't there prerequisites? Meaning there were things I had to do before I can get into the nursing program. And I was like, yeah. He was like, well, the same way you had to go learn your math, your reading, some of the basics that you needed in order to qualify for there. He said, now the only difference is I'm giving you these same prerequisites, these same things, except for it's for your spirit. Because you're going to need all of this training because you are broken. You're burdened and you've been rebuked. He said, now I need you to get into this training ground with me. He said that flesh wasn't serving you all that you thought it was it? He said, now get into the training ground. Get your prerequisites done. so that you can get into your course, so that you can get in the major that you're trying to get into. He said you can't get in the major until you get to your courses. You can't. You gotta get the prerequisites done first. And I said, "Ooh, talk to me," because I love it. You know, you gotta understand, the Father gonna get us. That's why he chasing us, y'all. Let me slow my message down, but that's why. And I was like, ooh. But when I get back to David, David said, taste and see that the Lord is good. He said, blessed is the man that trusts in him. Blessed are you. He said, when you trust in the Lord, you won't have any wants. You won't have any needs, because he supplies them. He supplies those needs and those wants. When you get in the spirit with him, you give him that access to search you, and he gets to make utterance on your behalf. Then he knows what you need. The thing in it is your faith. It's your faith. He said, let him show you who he is when he lifts his hand over your life, because it is so easy for us to want to go back to our strength in challenging times, and come up against them. Come up against that Holy Spirit. He said, when times get challenging, a lot of us revert back to our old patterns. We go back into our default setting. We go back into that programming that we're used to. Whether it's lust, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, whether it's depression, whether it's our anxiety. He said then we get back into those things because everything started becoming too challenging. He said, but in this season, he don't want you to go back to that broken state. He said he knows it's easy for you to give up and want to surrender and throw in the towel and say, I'd had enough. He said, but not in this state. Not in this state. He said his eyes is upon us. I want to tell you, he said it says the eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and the ears are open to their cries. So as long as you stand in the spirit, he gonna see all that needs to be seen for you. He gonna hear when you cry during those moments. But he said, remember his eyes is upon the righteous. So he's going to see it. And he said, how do you stay into that? How do you release yourself during those broken moments? He said, keeping your tongue from evil and your lips from deceit, and depart from evil and do good. Seek peace. He said, seek peace and pursue it. He said, seek his peace. That's how you're going to get through this. He said, in these challenging times, you have to go back and seek his peace. He said, because the brokenness prepares us for our greater purpose. And he talks about it a lot more in Luke 22 through 32. And I had to look back at this like, what? Because he said in the hour of temptation, in your hours of temptation, he said he wants you to understand that our faith is what's going to determine how that process go. But he wants you to know, despite it all, he got us. And in Luke 22, he's talking to Peter. And to be honest, y'all, I don't feel equipped to talk about it. But I know what our Father, he sends us out, right? And he says, do it anyway. And at this moment, the hours before Jesus is going to be crucified, right? He's conjugating with his disciples, and he's letting them know that things are about to change, and they're about to change fast, and you guys are about to have to go out, and you're about to have to speak, and you're about to have to still push the mission, still get it done. And Peter said, oh, no. I got your back. I'm going to be ride or die. You know how y'all have people who tell y'all that no matter what, girl, no matter what, boy, I'm going to be ride or die with you. And then the lovely thing about it is then Jesus has to tell them, no, you're not. How many times did Jesus have to also tell us during certain aspects of our lives, no, we're not? But he had to tell Peter about Peter in a few sentences. And he had to tell Peter, while Peter was telling him, what? If I have to go to prison for you, I'll go to prison for you. If I have to die for you, I'm going to die for you. And then you have to also understand at that very moment, God had to then turn around and he said, Simon. Ooh, it's like our parents when they call us by our government. He was like, Simon. Gotta tell you something. Simon. He says, Simon, behold, Satan have desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. Yeah. So, in that brokenness, in your broken state, when you have a chance that your faith is on shaky ground, Satan got to come in those moments. He got to tell God. He got to go get permission. He asks God. He said, ooh, I know you said this is one of your faithful. Can I sift him? Can I sift him as wheat? And if you're a believer, then you have to believe that he's going to give him permission to sift you. And let me tell y'all a story. I'm going to digress just for a moment before I get back on here. Last year, after my surgery, and as I was starting to gain my strength and everything, right? I was leading up before I was going to the Woman Evolve conference. And before then, as I was getting into our fasting, because if anybody who know Woman Evolve conference, Sarah, she be pushing the bar because she be like, do them 40 days of fasting. Get your mind and your body and your soul right before you come up in this. And when you going through this process, well, before then, I was hearing like, I done threw you down a rope. I didn't threw you down this rope. And the whole time I'm like, the rope, a net, like what is all of this? And then like the week later, it started telling me about the wheat. And I was so confused because when I'm hearing wheat and when I'm hearing all of this, I'm thinking to myself, okay, because I had a garden and I was like, oh, maybe somebody done threw something in my garden, so I'm gonna have to be able to pick out the weeds. I wasn't thinking of wheat, I was thinking of weeds. And so I'm like, oh my goodness, like let me try to figure out what does this mean? You know, how am I gonna do this? How am I gonna bind this up? Right? And it didn't all add up to me. And then I was like, okay, well, you know, when you got wheat, maybe you're starting to get abundancy. I was having all of these notions, never once thought about, oh my gosh, the devil's gonna sift you, right? So as we had finally made it to the Woman Evolve conference, and I loved it this year, well, last year now, because Sarah kept saying, if you have the funds, bring someone else. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna take my cousin with me. So I made sure, now I wasn't planning for myself, but I was planning for her. But then she was going through so many trials and tribulations in her life that I was just like, oh my goodness, I haven't had somebody who's tugging at my energy and trying to empty me at the same time as I'm trying to stay elevated and in the spirit. Because to be honest, when you with somebody who's draining you at the same time as you trying to be liberated, and you're not all the way in your word, but you're not all the way in your word because you're trying to do that ping pong motion. Well, in that time, I was like, you know what? I'm taking you for prayer. I went up there to the prayer room for anybody who went to the Woman Evolve conference. So I was like, come on, cuz I'm dragging her by the second day. I was like, you need prayer, because I need your spirit lifted, because you can't be high and the person with you low, because it mellows you, right? When you like, no, I'm trying to say it's this high vibration and the energy shift is off. Well, let me tell y'all, I went into that prayer room and I thought I was going in there for my cousin at that time, right? I'm gonna tell y'all, because I was green. I was green when I was like thinking off tangent with the message he was giving me. And I went in there, and I'll never forget this lady name. Her name was Patricia, okay? She had turned around, and I was like, I'm bringing my cousin in here because I need y'all to pray for her. I don't know what's going on. I'm doing all of this. And the lady named Patricia, she said, excuse me. I said, yeah. She said, can I pray for you? And I said, huh? I said, yeah, you can pray for me. And that lady held my hand and reintroduced ourselves, and I can't forget her because her name was Patricia and mine was Latricia, and I was like, oh, we almost, okay, yeah, I was like, oh, our names rhyme, and I was just going on, and she was like, yep, and as that lady grabbed my hand, she said, ooh, you're strong, and I was like, huh, and she just talking about the spirit, you energy, yeah, she was like, ooh, you're strong, and I was like, ooh, thank you. She was like, but you're so strong, who's praying for you, who's covering you? And I was like, Jesus. I was like, other than that, you know, like, you got family and stuff who pray for you. She's like, no, who's covering? I'm like, well, Jesus. She was like, well, let me tell you something. And I was like, what? She was like, you do know that Satan acts to sift you, right? And I was like, what? And she was like, you do know. She was like, I want to just pray for your sifting, because I want you to know you're going to make it out of it. But she was like, but you need covering. And I was like, huh? And at the time, because I'm telling you, I didn't know the attack was starting to come up against me. And I'm like, what? No. I'm like, thank you. But at the same moment, I'm crying in this room. And I'm trying to make sense of all of this with her at the same time. And I'm like, what? And it was just, I understood so much as I was reading in Luke 22 today, because I was like, he was sifting me. And just like Peter, I found myself in Peter's shoes where I failed. That's why I'm the brokenness, that failure, it comes. Because when I got back home, probably for a day or two, it was good, but the whole ride home, when I was listening to my auntie, she kept on telling you, back to reality, back to reality, back to reality. But I was off on another high that I was like, ooh. Then you start realizing you slipping back in your old ways, trying to have you a drink, trying to call that boo, trying to do all of these things that just takes you out of the spirit and back into your flesh. And that's when you realize you had finally missed your mark. You finally are entering into the flesh where you failing. But it was lovely, because one of the things, and I gotta find it, y'all, because one of the things that God had to tell Peter, he said, but I have prayed for thee, that thee flesh fail not. And when thou art covered, strengthen thee, brethren. He let him know he was going to fail. Yeah. He even told him he was going to deny him before 3 times. No, what did he tell him? He said, you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crowed. He already told him he was going to fail him. But it was so powerful when he told him, he said, but I have prayed for thee. So before I even stepped out and it was finna fail, God had already prayed for us. When you be in the spirit, he already prayed for you. He already made sure he covered you. He know that, especially us who's got breath in our body, we're going to be in our spirit. He knows sometimes you're going to be in your flesh. He knows these things. But he gave you grace for it. And when he gave you recognition to understand it, then he tells you, strengthen. When you strengthen yourself, then strengthen your brethren. Go out and preach. Go out and get his mission done. He said, but first, you got to understand that you failed. You got to understand that you feel weak. Yeah, he said, first you got to understand this. I had said, because when things start to come up against you, it can prohibit your faith, failure, redemption, humility, They all lead to the greater spiritual leadership. They will all lead to Jesus. They will all lead to God. It's the spiritual leadership. You got to get back into your leader. Stop thinking you the lead. You're not the lead. None of us is in the lead. Some of us probably have better messages. Some of us probably are closer in the spirit. But he said the spiritual leader is Jesus. So he said, when you want somebody to mentor you, when you want somebody to love on you, when you want to understand that, he said you have the fleshy ones, like me, like any of us who's preaching, you get the fleshy ones. He said, but then when you get in your spiritual leadership, that's your one-on-one with God. That's your one-on-one with Jesus. He said, but when you get in that spiritual leadership, he said, he will grow you up. And then when you get us fleshy ones, when you get to us, that's just your confirmation. That is your corporate worship. That is somebody agreeing with you on your behalf, because he tells you in where 2 or 3 are gathered, there he will be also. So sometimes you have to also step into understanding. I need my corporate worship as well as I'm needing my own spiritual worship. So that is a big, big, big thing he wants us to understand. He said, understanding these things, because he knows temptation is going to come, but he prayed for our temptation. He says, which is Jesus, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nonetheless, not my will, but yours. So he understood that the only way we were getting somewhere, what was about to take place when Jesus was about to go to the cross. He understood that his mission, he had to humble himself. He had to submit himself to his calling. A lot of us, we got scared when we heard our calling, because we understood that person he was calling to was much mightier than the person we are at that moment. That it becomes overwhelming, and we're like, what are you trying to do with this stretching? Where are you trying to get us? And a lot of us is like, oh my God, what do you want us to do with this cross that you're trying to have us bear? He said the same thing he had to do with his. Jesus said you got to do the same thing that he had to do with his cross. Bear it. He said you got to bear it. You got to submit yourself under him. He said this ain't no, he told y'all this isn't for the faint-hearted. He said, but you got to submit yourself. When you get broken like this, he said, then you get to submit yourself under to him. When you get broken and you get low enough, he said, then he know you got to come to him. I had said something. I want to look at what I said. I said, who do you trust to fill? I said, who do you trust to fill the lack in your life? Who do you trust to fill that lack? Because it can't be flesh. You can put it with temporary things like the drugs, the alcohol, and all. You can. You can put it into a partner. You can put it into your wife. You can put it into your husband. But ultimately, who you going to trust when lack comes? Because we all going to have it, whether it's financial, a loss of a relationship. It's something that's going to bring lack upon you. All of us. And he wants to know in those moments, where's your trust? Where's your trust leading you to? But he said when you get to the right place of surrender, he said it'll bring you peace. It will bring peace in your life. You got to remember, as Jesus was asking his Father to take his cup, and he was pleading. He was in the flesh. He was pleading. Like, this can't be the only way. And when he realized it was, you know what happened? An angel came in to minister to him. That brought him peace with him bearing up his cross and fulfilling his purpose. Well, when we get to these places in life of our surrenderance. We might not get an angel who's going to come and minister to us, but you will get a sense of peace, a sense of calm, a sense of, even though this is rough right now and I don't understand it, you still find some level of peace that you're like, you know what? All right, I'm here. Finances could be messed up, but I'm here. House could be looking a mess. Kids could be acting up. School could be going rough, but I'm here. You will get to that spot where you like, it's his will. Everything he said, we can't put our hands on it in the moments. He said, surrender. He said, surrender. Sit down. Sit down. He said, let me minister with you. He said, let me in there. Let me in your heart. He said, let me in there. He said, because when you let me in there, he said, I get to make utterance on your behalf. He said, but when you step out of that, the agony steps in. And I said, knowing when you are in agony, instead of looking for something else, you have to stay in your prayers. Because when the agony comes of the suffering that has been too long, that the doubt creeps up, that all of these things start pushing against us, we often step out of our spiritual being. We're flesh. At the end of the day, we're flesh. So when things start to wear down on us, when the burdens start to pick up, when we feeling broken, when we feeling rebuked, agony comes with that. And we get into a spot that we forget about prayers. We forget about the prayers. We forget to meditate. We forget all of that. Instead, we step into our flesh. We like, dang, I know I need to make my mortgage payment. How I'm finna make my mortgage payment? Okay, dang, my kids. Okay, I'm finna go figure out how I'm finna get this for my. You get into these frenzies. You get into a panic attack. You get into that because you stepped out of the spirit. When he's telling us in these moments, when you get down to that level of where you feeling that agony, he said, baby, stay in your prayers. He said, yes, they're about to attack you. You are speaking my language. He said they gotta attack you. They have to persecute you. They gotta get you right here. They gotta continue rebuking you. They gotta continue trying to silence you. You're speaking his language. He said, but in this time, he said, stay in your prayers. Stay in your prayers. He said, stay right here with me. Stay in the spirit. He said, because I'm fighting on your behalf. And he said, as I'm fighting on your behalf, he said, the same way they took you into that agony and the same faith you had when you were going into that agony, he said, I need you to ride that wave. So when you come to the end, you out of that with the same level of faith. He said, I need you to keep that same level of faith while they're finna rebuke you, while they're finna try to shut you down. He said, keep that level of momentum going. Stay in them prayers. That's for me. In Ephesians 6:13, he said, therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil days, and have done all, stand firm. In this season, you're going to have to stand firm and keep on your whole armor, because they're coming for you. If you saying you're a child of God, if you're saying you right here and you rocking with him, you have to stand in this season, baby, because you're about to be, if you didn't want to be attacked, you're going to be attacked. If you thought you were finna be able to slide this thing out, he said, don't, you ain't got to get in your Peter mode and deny him. He said, if you rocking with him, he's still going to redeem you. He's still going to love on you. He's still going to restore you. He said, but you ain't got to go through that. He said, Peter showed you what that looked like already when you deny him. And David already told us, he said, you going to fall short. He said, but if you stay in the spirit, David reminded us, he said, oh, baby, I'm a poor man. He said, but I know if I go into the spirit, any and everything that I lost or thinking I'm losing, he said, oh, no. He know God going to take care of my troubles. Yeah, he said, I know it. And he said, when I sit in the spirit, he said he understands that enlightenment that Jesus gave him, that God gave him, He said he knows it'll wipe that shame away. He said, so in this season, don't let nobody try to remind you of your past. And they like, oh, aren't you so-and-so? No, I'm Latricia. You can put your name on there. Let them know who you are. Let them know what your purpose is. Don't come dredging up my past. Baby, I see you still living in the past, but right now I'm working on my future, and either you part of it or you not. But the way that you're talking, I know that you're not, because you still living in the past. I can't be there with you. You got to be able to know how to shift and move in these seasons, because the burden is finna get up on you. That rebuking is finna get up on you. And ultimately what we're trying to do is get to our purpose, right? We're trying to get to our purpose within God, not the purpose that we formulated. Because that them look like two different things. The purpose I have and the purpose that God gave me, them is two different. And then the big part of it, he said, baby, I got to rebuke that up off of you. He said, no. I wanted to tell you what else he told me. He said, meaning at the end of it all, keep your faith intact. Just as before when you entered the temptation. Okay, I did talk about that. My bad, y'all. Yes, don't forget. Yes, like and subscribe and share. Your girl, she having to go back to her notes because sometimes I be still thinking too fast. But he says, understand, you don't have the power he do. Jesus said, remember, at the end of the day, he put his power in us. But we have to be careful with his power. He said he put his power in us, but we got to be careful with his power, because sometimes he lets us know we can be mistaking his power for our power. And he wanted you to understand that you don't have the power he has. That's why he makes utterance on our behalf, because he understands he's sitting on the right hand of God. So he utters on our behalf. He intercedes. He intercedes. And one of the things we can't intercede for ourselves, baby. Because if you ain't heard nothing else, let me tell you, when you start putting your hands on it, it get a little tarnished. It get a little messy. Take your hands off of the wheel. I don't know where that came from, but he said, take your hands off the wheel. Take your hands off. Because he said, he wants you to understand this rebuking that you're about to go through. This rebuking that you're about to go through. He said that is his correction. That's the correction that leads to his power. And what I end up reading to understand about the rebuking and this correction, it was in Hebrews 12:5-6. He said, my son, do not make light of the Lord disciplines, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the ones he loves, and he chastens the ones he accepts as his son. So considering, I was like, what is this? And it's like, considering him that endures against their own sins, that you won't grow weary. So when you are being rebuked, or when you are falling short of your own glory with and missing, and as Pastor Teray would say, missing the mark, that you couldn't all the way make the mark, you have to understand you can't get worry in that time. That's when you can't get weary. You can't get faint-hearted. That's when you got to step back into your prayers. That's when you got to step back into your spirit. That is when you got to understand, what are we doing this for, Lord? Because you're trying to understand his purpose. At some point, you have to be at peace with that. Because most times what I realized is when you started getting rebuked by God for his correction, and he's chastising you, he's letting you know, I need to get you back on the correct track. And he said, and during this time, that's when the battle starts. That's when the battle will start with your mind and tell you, oh, I'm not good enough for this. Even that's when it starts. He said, and then some people, when they get to this point, they go back into their coping mechanisms where they think they need alcohol, where they think they need drugs, where they have the lust of their flesh started feeding up again. And he said, and then this time, that's when you are in a battle. He said, this is when you are being rebuked into your correction. He said, a lot of people fall off at this very moment. He said, because they don't understand what they're being rebuked for. But God wanted you to know, he said, just like your fleshly father, your biological father, mother, or adopted parent, I mean, whoever is correcting you, he said, just like they will chastise you, just like they will correct you, just like when they will tell you, I don't like this, change this, you have all different levels. You know, you got to understand, in the physical, in our flesh, you might have got your butt whooped. But the lovely thing is, when God corrects you, he's gentle. You might not like it. It might hurt, and you might feel that sting as a spiritual whooping. You're going to feel that thing. But he said he has to correct you. He has to correct you because you're going out here with his son name and you representing him. He has to correct you. Yes. He said, and remember, he said, when you start going through these hard times right now, he said, remember what it's for. Remember his son. He said, when you get in these battles in this season, remember his son. Remember why he went up on the cross. So that you got something to hold on to in the fight. Because the fight is finna try to wrestle you back down to flesh. He said, and you got to be able to battle that out in the spirit. And he said, one of the ways you're going to be able to do that is not getting weary. But when you start getting weary, he said, think of his son. When you start getting weary, think about that cross and how he had to pick it up and he had to die for you so that you can get to this point. He said, a lot of us, we got to understand. What did he say? He said, ye have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against you. He said, you still in your sinful natures. We still in our sinful natures. That's why we can't push past sometimes them coping mechanisms, because we're still in our sinful nature. He said, but if you could push past those coping mechanisms and understand that as a child of God, he said, baby, you are an overcomer. You are an overcomer. He said, when you realize that you're in your spirit, and he said, when you understand that you got the Holy Spirit up inside of you, he said, you're no longer looking for the coping mechanism. He said, he understand that because you're still in your spirit. You ain't resisted the spirit yet. I meant the flesh yet. He said, but when you step into your spiritual aspect, he said, then you realize you are an overcomer. Yeah. He said, and that's a whole nother battle. But he said, then you just get into that spot right there where you starting to overcome. He said, and then he wants you to understand this rebuke is to help you shift and not get into worry in the face of temptation, because you are in training. He said, you're in training to build your faith. He said, that's when you become in training. When you realize you are an overcomer, he said, now you stepped into training. You're no longer in the prerequisite phase, baby. Oh, Lord. He said, then you get into training. He said, let me go back. What did I tell y'all? He said, when you get that knowledge, you got the knowing. He said, but when you get this wisdom, he said, that's when he wants you to put it into practice. So when you get from the fear that you can't have him in the spirit, when you get into that spirit, and he said, and you get that cultivated in you, he said, once you understand that, and anytime you step out of it, fear rises. It should arise because you're in your flesh. He said, but when you stay in his spirit, he said, then you started your prerequisites. But he said, when he gets you into there, and he said, then you get into your major. And when you get into your major, what do you got to do in there? You got to get the knowledge and you got to get trained. He said, so when you in your rebuking process for that correction, when he's telling you that everything you doing ain't up to par for him, he's letting you know now you're in training. He says, so understand that each day you are alive, you may sin, you may fall short of the will of God that he has for us. But he said, but when you stay in your prayers, but when you stay in his spirit, he said, despite of, he's going to have to correct you. And he said, most times, whether you the saint of all, he said, you still go. He said, life itself, since we were all born into sin, has a way to pull you into sin. He said that is why the biggest fight is of our flesh, day in and day out. It's our flesh. He said our flesh, because it's so weak. Because it's so weak, it's a day in and day out that you got to start exercising. You got to exercise that spirit. You got to exercise those utterances. You got to exercise your ears in order to hear his voice. This is an exercise. He said you is in training. And he said how you respond to things in the physical, that lets you know where your level of training is at. How are you responding to the day-to-day things when stress get up on you, when your kids ain't acting right, when you're not making the perfect grades in school, when you get fired from your job, when people turn their back on you, when people start walking away from you? He said, baby, that is training. He said, when you start getting the spirit and you start seeing that, he said, stay in your prayers. He said, double down on them prayers. He said, because you are in your training season. He said, and he don't want you to go to coping when you're an overcomer. He said, don't go back to them coping. He said, don't go back to them coping skills. Them coping skills didn't serve you. And he said, and you end up like Moses walking around that same mountain over and over and over again. For a lot of you, when you get back into that spirit, you go back into the repeat offender mode. Come on now. He said, get out that mode. He said, you know what that is. He said, ain't nothing changed over there. Anytime you go back to that Ferris wheel, all you doing is going around and around and around. He said, get off of it. Ain't you dizzy? He said, ain't you dizzy now? Get off of that. He said, ain't nothing over there. He said, when you are rebuked, that is God's way of leading us to Jesus, because we have to understand that we can't enter into heaven except through his son. He says, so with all you getting, you better get an understanding so that you can get this wisdom, because you can't get into heaven without his son. So you got to get in that spirit. You got to get him making utterance on your behalf. You got to get that in this. If you don't get nothing else in this, he said you better get that understanding. He said because he know the training you're going through. He said he know it doesn't feel good. He said he know it don't feel good, and you got to be careful, because he said it could make you bitter. Ooh. Said be careful. In Hebrews 12:11, he said something, because I didn't write it down, so I gotta get somewhere, y'all. Hold on, let me see if that's what I marked in here. I probably, because your girl, y'all know it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, y'all, while I'm finding my Hebrews. Yes. Don't forget to drop a comment too. What did I say? Hebrews 11. He said, now no chastising for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nonetheless, afterwards, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. Ooh, I love that. He's saying to you that after you done with your training, you will start reaping his fruit. He said, when you get into your righteous stance, you will see your fruit. He said, but first you had to meet his prerequisites, then get into your major, which is your training in your spirit, exercise it, fall, you're going to fall. During the process, David already told all of us, you're going to fall. Then he showed us through Peter that, hey, now I'm going to have to call you by your name and correct you. I can't call you Peter in this moment when I got to tell you, I got to call you Simon. I got to let you know, hey, in the hour of temptation, you got to stand. You got to fight in your hour of temptation. And how you going to fight, baby? You got to pray. You got to come seek the Lord with all your heart. He said, then you got to fight. He said, so that way when he brings you up, he going to let you know. What did I tell you? I said, because then when you get in this fight, in this season, he said, then I can take you from just your coping skills. He said, I can take you from them. I can deliver you from them coping skills. So when you first start out, you're not out of your coping skills yet. He said, when you first get in that spirit, everything ain't dead yet. You got to fight. He said you're going to be going back and forth. You're going to be in the spirit, in the flesh, in the spirit, in the flesh, in the spirit, in the flesh. He said, and then you're going to come to a season where you done with your coping. He said, and then when you get in that season and you done with your coping, he said, now you are overcomer. He said, now that you're overcoming these things, he said, now you're in training. He said, now you're in training. Now you ready to fight. Now I can be able to use you. Now I can. And I have wrote something, y'all. Ooh, I want to know what I wrote. Your girl gotta look at what she wrote real quick. Maybe that back. Y'all know sometimes when you start being able to flow, you just can't read all your notes from verbatim. Y'all, I don't know if I wrote it down. Or maybe I did and I just don't see it. But y'all gotta remember, God is good. God is good. He's taking a lot of y'all, taking a lot of us from our coping skills to our training skills. And that is beautiful. That is beautiful. This is a beautiful process. And he said, and when you get right here, he said, the best ain't even yet. He said, when you get right here, he said, then he's able to release his power within you. He said, when you get to this point and you understand what the training is for, he said he get to release his power in you. I have Psalms 119:71. It was good for me to be afflicted so I might learn your decrees. He said it was good. Y'all have to understand it was good when the Father afflicted you. When he started letting that rebuke happen. When he let those broken moments happen in your life. When he let them burdens get up on you. He said he had to do that to make sure you can withstand in these seasons. He said because then he said it was good for me to be. That's when you realize it was good for me to be afflicted. So that I might learn his decrees. He said so when you get into this into the mode where you're being released. He said when you get into your release season, all of those burdens, all of those lessons that you had to learn, all of those broken moments that you had to endure, all of those moments of people rebuking you, talking about you, slandering your name, you name it, all the self-sabotaging things that you did to yourself. He said, I want you to take account of all of that. All of that. All of it. He said, take account of it, because you're going to need it when he started releasing your powers, because then you have your parameters. You know what you can and you can't tolerate. He said he sent you to that. He said, so therefore, when you are broken, burdened, and rebuked, you are positioned for spiritual empowerment and God's glory to be revealed through you. He said, then they're going to know you've been sitting with him. They're going to know you've been sitting with him. They're going to know that his spirit is in you. He said the power of the Holy Spirit is then released from you. He said it's released. He said, look at Acts 1:8. He said, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes unto you, and you will be my witness. He said you will be his witness, Jesus Christ's witness, about how power moves. When you get into that training, he said, then they're going to be able to know. He said they're going to be able to look. Some people going to be able to look back at the ratchetness, those drunken days, the lying days, the lustful days, those drug addict days. He said them people going to be able to look back, and then they looked at how he cleaned you up now, and they're going to be able to witness who he is. They're going to know who he is through you changing and getting yourself together. He said then they will know that his power moves. He said spiritual power comes after the refining experience. He said his spiritual power comes after that. The disciplines that you have to endure, he said those are your trials and your tribulations. He said because they become mighty witnesses of where you are in your faith. He said when you get up into his spiritual power, those become your witnesses. He said it gets to be a chance of the witness of the faith that you had in him. That's when it is released. That's when his power is released into you. And that is when you are walking in your full glory. Your full glory, not no half glory, not no fake glory, ain't none of that going on. He said that's when you stepped into his power. He said his Holy Spirit is in you, his temple. He said each and every one of us who told him we receive him, he gave us his spirit. He said, but just because you have his spirit, you have not released his power. He's trying to get you from just having his spirit to getting you in his power. And half of that is when you are done coping and you start overcoming all of those fearful moments, all of those doubting moments, all of those scarcity moments. He said when you step out of that and you get into overcoming these things, he said, baby, he said he sees it. You're going to start being one of his witnesses. And when you become one of his witnesses, he said, baby, he said, baby, hold up now. He said, I want you to hold up. He said, because when you get into that, you become spiritually empowered. He said he's just trying to get you to be spiritually empowered. He's trying to get you to where you understand that your weakness is made whole in him. He said he understand when you came and sat at his table, you came and sat at his table empty and with nothing. He said, but as he sat with you and he talked to you and he ministered to you, he told you, baby, pick up my yoke. For my burdens light. They light. He didn't tell you weren't going to suffer. He said they lighter. Because you don't have to, you got to fight, but your fight ain't, that ain't the same fight. Because he told you, he said, after all that you have done, he said, stand firm. Why? So that you can watch the salvation of the Lord. He said, when all of this is done, he said, stand still. Because he got to get his glory. He said, because I got to get my glory now. He said, so don't go out here thinking everything is in your strength. He said, I got that. I know what you're going through. I know where you've been. He said, baby, I got you. stand in this. Stand in this. And I said, oh, Father. And what did I say, y'all? I'm going to give y'all my last scripture before I get off of here. Because in Jobs 42:5, he said, my ears have heard. My ears have heard of you. He said, but now my eyes have seen you. He said, baby, after all that is said and done, he said, my ears has heard of you, but now my eyes have been able to see. My eyes have been able to see you. Baby, open your eyes. Everything that you want, everything that you need is in your Father's house. But you got to go sit with him. Won't you go sit with that bank teller when you need to borrow some money? Won't you go sit with the people at the school when you want to start the school? Won't you go sit with them people on that job interview if you know you need a job? When your kids acting up, won't you go wait and sit for that principal to talk about how your kids is acting up? Won't you go stand in that line when you know you need to get some groceries? He said that's the same way you got to do with him, baby. Take one of them moments and sit with him. He said, let me get you where I want. Let me get you there. He said, everybody going to tell you about the fleshy flesh. He said, and I don't mind you going to get fleshy flesh information. He said, but I want to give you this knowledge firsthand. He said, I want to give you the knowledge firsthand. He said, baby, come sit with me. All who are heavy and burdened. He said, come and sit with me. He said, because when you come sit with me, I got something for you. He said, I got a whole spirit. I got a whole spirit over here that's finna drop something in you. He said, it ain't nobody. He said, and when I drop this in you, he said, you got to get ready. He said, you got to get ready for some suffering because ain't nobody finna like this change. He said, because this change, because God got boundaries. He got some boundaries of things that he ain't accepting. So your boundaries going to have to change. You're going to have to level up because he's letting you know as you get my spirit, I got some stuff I don't like. And I got work for you to do. In the same way you would go to somebody's job and clock on their job, he said, you got to come clock into my job. I got work for you too. Same way if you wanted to be out here on the streets hustling. He said, yep, just like they can give you a pack to go sell so you can get your re-up and all of this. He said, I got some work for you too. He said, you might go back and forth with them streets for a minute. He said, but baby, come here. He said, come here. Come here and let me impart this spirit into you. I got some work for you to do too. Yep, this is repeat offender season. He said, come on up over here. Come on up in here. All y'all repeat offenders. He said, come on up in here. He said, because that's everybody. Everybody's a repeat offender. All of us is jumping from spirit to flesh, spirit to flesh, spirit to flesh. Some of us, we get to hide it. Everybody ain't going to see it. And some of us understand that now we became an example of what it looked like, that we gon' protest it because we need to make sure that other people know they're not alone. And to the point where we can get them to where our Father is. To where our Father is. And the only way we're going to get them to see where that's at is, baby, it's in your heart. It's you sitting down, you opening your heart, and you inviting him in. He said, baby, this ain't your season to be like lukewarm water where he gonna spit you out his mouth. He said, baby, pick. Hot or cold? Pick in this season. He said, pick. You want to be hot? You want to be cold? What you want to be? He said, but don't be like lukewarm water where you're trying to straddle a fence. He said, pick. He said, because I got something. I got something. And he's just trying to will you in. He said, because I got to know if you want to meet these prerequisites. He said, I want to know if you're going to step in that training. Get on this battlefield. He want to know if you're going to get on there. He said the only way he going to know you on there, in there. He going to know you in there is if you in his training. He said because you can't get the power without the training. Because he don't want you to misuse his power. But if you can get in his training class, he said, then I can give you my power. Once he know you passed his test. That's when he's going and making utterance on your behalf. That's when he's searching your heart. That's when he's watching the things that you say. And he had told us, he said, baby, in order to get some of this, he said, keep your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from deceit. He said, but do good. Seek peace and pursue it. What you pursuing in this season? What are you pursuing in this season? Our Father got something for us. He said, but the only way you're going to be able to get this, baby, is come sit with me. He said, you got to come sit with me. He said, because I redeemed you. He said, I redeemed you. He said, I bought you. I bought you for a price. And that price was my life. He said, I bought you for a price. He said, but now that I bought you, all I want you to do is come sit with me. Come sit with me. He said, because I'm still interceding on your behalf up here with my Father to let them know. I know they're still wrestling with their flesh. I know. He said, I know. He said, but I done made utterance on her behalf. And he said, and when she get in alignment with me, when he get in alignment with me, we're going to see that we partner for the good. He said, but when I'm uttering and I'm doing this, he said, I can't. He said, quit jumping in and out of this spirit. He said, baby, it's lukewarm. He said, but get on up in here. Pick a side. He said, pick a side. He said, because when you get in here, he said, I made utterance on your behalf. He said, I keep telling the Father, she coming. He coming. They right there. He said, oh, can't you see? You right there. He said, but any man who can hear him knock, he said, invite him in. He said, can you hear me knocking? He said, I'm knocking. You know, at some point, you ever had a ghetto person like me who start kicking your door when I've been knocking and you ain't answering the door, then I start kicking at your door. I start kicking at your door to let you know I'm outside your house. He said, he knocking, let him in. He said, come on, man, it's cold out here. Let me in. Y'all, I'm a fool. All right, I'm about to get up off of here. But y'all got to understand that this burden, this brokenness, and this rebuke is all there. It's all there to unleash the power within you. And you can't have the power without being broken. You got to be broken open, baby. It's like a fortune cookie. It's like a fortune cookie. You got to get broken open, baby. Your yolk got to spill. Your yolk got to spill. Because he got to see what's up in there. He got to see what it's made out of. What substances is up in there. What he can use and what he got to get rid of. He said, your time is now. Your time is now. He said, come on. It is y'all girl, Trisha. Checking back in. I know this was longer than 30 minutes, and I usually try to make my videos at least 30 minutes. But this message was powerful. I was wrestling with this message for about 3 or 4 days. Usually I can get me a little feel-good message or something that I was used to. And he's like, well, you know what? I got one for you. And I was like, what is that? He said, boo-boo. He said, you need to talk about being broken, burdened, and rebuked because you know too well about each and every one of them categories. And he said, and I had to get you to go through this so that I could start releasing my power within you. He said, you might have dibbled and dabbled. He said, but now I had to get you out of your prerequisites and take you over to this training ground so that I can let my power go. He said, he said, sometimes we get stuck in the transitions. And he said, and when you get stuck in these transitional moments, you get weary. And he said, he said, I don't want you to get worried in these transitional moments. He said, all who is weary. He said, come to him. Come to him when you start getting weary. He said, come to you, because the breaking got to happen. The rebuking it all has to happen. He said, but when you get in these transitions, he don't want you to go back into coping. He wants you to go to overcoming. He wants you to overcome them. He wants you to push past that, because you need to get up there to your mountain. You got to get up there to your mountain. Your salvation and everything is up there. And he said, when you get up there, you're able to walk it out. That means you're coming down off the other side of that mountain. And then you're going to be able to go out and teach it. Before you have to go up another mountain. Before you got to repeat this whole process. You are never going to be done being broken, burdened, or rebuked. He said, because it's a valley. He said, each time you think you done, you got another one. He said, some of them got a little longer rest period and stuff in there before you get to the next one. He said, but baby, you going. He said, but in this season, he don't want you to lose yourself learning the process. He said that's why he wants you to enjoy the process, because you have to learn this process in order to walk him out the right way. After all, what are we all trying to do? We all trying to get like Jesus. And the only way we're going to do that is to learn his process. He gave us some really good teachers. He gave us some really good lessons in the Bible. And some of us see it at surface level. But when you get down into the story and you let him get down in these traps with you, he gets to show you why they are the stories that they are, because they're so powerful. And the lessons are beyond our comprehension. But he said, but once you get there, it ain't no denying it. But you got to first get there. It is your girl Trisha checking in with another message. If you see your brother or sister crown tipping, fix it. You ain't got to tell them it's broken. You ain't got to tell them it's tipping. Just help them fix it. Until next time, y'all. Love on each other. Respect each other. And don't forget, we all we got. Each one teach one. Each one teach one.